Okay, we'll start with this. The ongoing back and forth between the people at BOXXER and the people at Matchroom. Did Jai Opataya actually know the numbers that were on the table? Ben Shalom clarifies email to Jai Opataya's promoter.
There's no I in promoter.
Reactport gave his mandatory position and is now understood to be targeting a clash with the WBA champion France's own Arsene Goulamarian. Eddie Hearn, co-promoter of Jai Opataya, claimed that BOXXER emailed Opataya's other co-promoter, Mick Francis of Tasman Fighters, to revive an Opataya versus Reactport bout after withdrawing from the bids to pursue another world title opportunity.
Which was a redundancy at that point because Reactport gave up his Mando spot, so the IBF went down their ranks.
What they always do, and they assigned another mandatory challenger. Eddie Hearn has claimed that BOXXER emailed one of Jai Opataya's promoters, Mick Francis, "Don't tell Eddie Hearn we're contacting you, but would you like to make the Richard Reactport fight on September 30th?
This was said to have taken place after Richard Reactport withdrew from the purse bid.
But if he withdrew from the purse bid and relinquished his mandatory status, why would they have then pursued a fight with Jai afterwards? And it's likely because they were avoiding the purse bid to avoid Matchroom. To avoid Matchroom potentially winning the bid and Richard having to cross over to their side of things.
They wanted to cut Eddie Hearn and Matchroom out of the deal and do a fight with Tasman Fighters straight away.
He actually had some fun and games on it this morning because I saw Ben Shalom's interview yesterday where he said, "We pulled out of the purse bids on the day because we had another world championship opportunity."
It's according to Eddie Hearn.
He's quoting Ben Shalom. That was the reason that Ben gave for pulling Richard Reactport out of that fight, only for Team Reactport to end up emailing Jai Opataya afterwards,
Right.
seeing if they still wanted to do a deal.
Right.
What happened to the world title opportunity you were talking about? You pulled Richard out of that purse bid on the premise that you had another title shot for him lined up. Where is it?
Sounds like you were just trying to do the fight without Matchroom involved. That's what it sounds like.
It wasn't feasible anyway because Jai Opataya was still under orders. Richard Reactport or no Richard Reactport. Just because Richard relinquished his mandatory status doesn't mean that Jai wasn't still under orders. He was still under orders.
You gave up your Mando spot. At that point, he couldn't fight you if he wanted to. He had to fight whoever the IBF assigned him.
They emailed Mick Francis from Tasman Fighters today saying, "Don't tell Eddie Hearn we're contacting you, but would you like to make the Richard Reactport fight on September 30th?
You gave up your Mando spot. At that point, he couldn't fight you if he wanted to. He had to fight whoever the IBF assigned him.
First, it was Mayris Breedis, then it subsequently became Jordan Thompson. And that fight is made, that fight is done, whereas Richard
Ain't got no fight date. Richard's fight's not done.
You better hope that Goulamarian takes you up on whatever offer you make him, because if he doesn't, you will have costed your fighter a world title opportunity needlessly.
Not a good look.
Not a good look for Ben Shalom. Shalom also stated that communication was made because they were unsure if the offer from BOXXER to Opataya's team was being fed back to Opataya himself, insinuating that if the Australian knew the financial details, he may have been incentivized to take the fight in the UK with BOXXER and Sky Sports. Did he know the offer that was on the table? There was concern from someone who works with us that maybe Opataya didn't actually know what was on the table for him.
No, there still is. First of all, that email wasn't from myself. We have a big company now. I think there was someone that felt from Jai Opataya's comments maybe he hadn't been told what was offered, maybe he hadn't been told, and it was just, I think that was it. They know straight away, that was on the same day. It's not a fight that we felt we can make. You know, Richard Reactport's worked very, very hard for his position. He's number one in 2 governing bodies. He's got world titles. He's in the mandatory position for Chris Smith. And so he's going to take a deal that pays him enough money on the right day that's going to trump what he's already got on the table. And the prospect of potentially going to Australia, which is what we told the plan was for Jai, and earning less than he would in his next fight, versus, I can understand if you have another, if this is a voluntary defence and you have no other opportunities, or a mandatory and you have no other opportunities. Richard's in a very, very strong position, and so we just line things up and decide what's best, and that's where it is. And all this talk about not working with other promoters and this and that, this weekend we've got Top Rank with Michaela Mayer, we've got Queensbury with Mark Heffron, who've all helped put the card together. We're working with Wasserman with the main event. We want to work with other promoters, but it's difficult if there's the constant, barrage of...
Ben Shalom claims that they're willing to work with other promotional outfits, but that only seems to be so long as they are at the helm. of promotion. And that wouldn't have been the case if Matchroom would have won that purse bid. If Matchroom would have won that purse bid, Richard would have had to cross the street. They didn't want that.
Of course not. That's why they pulled him out. And you say that he's in a mandatory position for Chris Billum-Smith, then why was he waiting around for Jai Opataya?
If it was your intention to do the rematch between them, why would you focus on Jai? Why would you wait until the day of the purse bid to pull him out if it was your intention to do a Chris Billum-Smith rematch?
Talking about Chris Billum-Smith, aren't you pursuing an Arsene Goulamarian fight? Which one is it?
I don't got nothing against Ben Shalom, and I don't benefit in the least bit from his failures.
I don't.
It's not saying I want to see him fail. I got nothing against the guy, but I'd be lying to you if I told you that he doesn't seem a guy who's in over his head to me, fumbling his own words, trying to explain himself. He says he wasn't even the one that sent the email to Jai Opataya's team.
Sure it wasn't.
Somebody sent it, and at that point, it was too late. Your fighter gave up his mandatory position. You know how the IBF does it. They move on. They assign somebody else the mandatory. So what are you still sending emails to Jai for?
Let's call a spade a spade. You were trying to go around Matchroom. You were trying to go around Eddie Hearn, and you got caught.
And unless you book your fighter another fight, unless you get him another world title opportunity, that reflects poorly on you. In addition to Ben Shalom and all things BOXXER, Liam Smith's trainer says there's been no VADA testing for this Eubank rematch.
You got the impression that he would have liked that he would have preferred if that additional layer of testing had been in play.
It's not saying that there's no anti-doping testing in association with this weekend's fight. There is. UCAD is handling the testing. Per a post from Chris Eubank Jr., some urine samples they swung by and collected.
UCAD is testing these guys, but that additional layer by way of VADA.
It seems that Ben Shalom and the people at BOXXER aren't footing the bill for that additional line of testing. When asked about it, this was Ben Shalom's rationale.
The fighters have been tested multiple times and passed tests multiple times. UCAD are the authority. UCAD are the authority that can ban fighters. UCAD are the authority that don't have problems. So, as we've seen with VADA, and it's not a case, when we have the confidence from UCAD that the fighters are going to be tested, and multiple times, then what more can we do? And especially when they're the authority, I think the biggest problem, in my opinion, and not to go into what I think should be done, is all the different bodies and all the when VADA tests, we saw the problem with Conor Benn. What jurisdiction? Who's making the decision? When are we going to find out the test? And we've seen it so many times. When do we find out the test? There's no uniform rules. The answer is not to create more. It's to invest more in UCAD. It's to invest more in a uniform system. I'm not saying UCAD's perfect, but when they test, they do test and they get it right. But that's where the focus should be going.
His response seemed to be that why pay for VADA when UCAD's handling the testing? And UCAD, unlike VADA, they do have teeth. The teeth to adjudicate, to enforce penalties. Unlike VADA, all they can do is report the findings.
Fair enough, but it's still an additional layer of testing.
Still an additional layer of testing that Matchroom is paying for, that BOXXER isn't, and yet it's Matchroom that's supposed to be in the hot seat.
Matchroom employs the assistance of both UCAD, VADA, and Drug-Free Sport. They're the only ones using anti-doping testing by way of Drug-Free Sport, but those are three separate anti-doping agencies.
Drug-Free Sport does handle anti-doping for other sports, but Matchroom are the only ones employing them for boxing. They're just now getting into boxing. All the same, it seems to me that Matchroom is spending more money, more often, on more shows for consistent anti-doping tests as much as they can. Yet they're the ones in the hot seat, whereas BOXXER...
Let's just call a spade a spade. The Boo Birds and the Bleeding Hearts don't keep the energy for Ben Shalom that they keep for Eddie Hearn.
Let's be honest, they don't even care that much about doping in the sport of boxing. They just take any and every opportunity to criticize Eddie Hearn and criticize Matchroom because at this time, that's the cool, trendy thing to do, even when it doesn't make sense.
That's what Victor Conti's doing right now.
Victor Conti, who stated, Jessica McCaskill is speaking out about Eddie Hearn and Matchroom. Her serious allegations need exploration. I work with elite boxers that do VADA testing, and they always get their test results emailed about 2 weeks after sample collection.
Bear in mind, Matchroom haven't stopped using VADA. They used VADA for the Joshua versus Helenius fight.
They're using VADA for the upcoming Jack Catterall versus Jorge Linares fight.
They're still using VADA, but they're not the only anti-doping agency they're using. Sometimes they use UCAT, sometimes they use Drug-Free Sport, other times they use VADA.
Yet Victor Conti is trying to shed a harsh light on Matchroom more than he should be trying to shed a hard light on BOXXER. BOXXER's not using VADA. What about them?
What about Queensbury?
How often do they employ the Voluntary Anti-Doping Association? And why doesn't Victor keep the energy for them that he keeps from Matchroom, who are employing 3 separate anti-doping agencies?
Where does Victor Conti get that they're the ones not doing enough?
Twitter user that goes by the name Yes, it's Rob Harvey, replied to Victor by saying, "Your obsession with Eddie Hearn is seriously unhealthy, man." To which Victor responded, "You are dead wrong. My obsession is with clean boxing and attempting to bring about adequate drug testing. I also speak out about Premier Boxing Champions and their lack of adequate drug testing. In my opinion, all boxing promoters can do more to reduce health risks, and yet, more often than not, he goes after Eddie. He goes after Matchroom. He doesn't make much, if any, mention of BOXXER or much, if any, mention of Queensbury."
They're not spending anywhere near as much on anti-doping tests for their shows as Matchroom is, so what's Victor's real beef here?
He knows he'd be barking up the wrong tree with those people. That's his real beef. He's not going to bother with them. He's going to keep going after Matchroom because not only does Matchroom do more shows than BOXXER, than Queensbury,
He wants VADA to be the mainstay. It's not good enough that sometimes Matchroom uses UCAD and sometimes they use drug-free sport. He wants all of that money, all that anti-doping money.
he wants Matchroom's entire anti-doping budget to go to VADA. Otherwise, he will accuse them of not doing enough, even when they're doing more than everyone else.
There's no VADA testing for this weekend's fight. There's no VADA testing for Eubank versus Smith 2.
Victor doesn't seem too bothered about it.
Even after VADA themselves, via their own social media page, announced that they will be in charge of the testing for Jack Catterall versus Jorge Linares.
To Victor, that's not enough, because what Victor really wants is to be knee-deep inside of Matchroom's pocket. That's what it's all about.
That's what it is.
Then if you're not spending all your money with us, then you're the bad guy.
What about all these other promoters that don't pay for VADA testing?
Let's be honest, Victor knows, like I know, like you know, that those other outfits ain't got Matchroom's budget.
So why waste your time?
Anti-doping testing ain't cheap. Shows are expensive enough to put on as it is. Satisfying the financial demands of the fighters and their teams. Tack on anti-doping testing.
It's that much more expensive, but you're not hassling all these other guys.
Because you know, they ain't got it to blow anyway, so why bother?
You gonna balk it, Frank?
This guy's doing shows at York Hole, the Kappa Box. These are not big shows.
It's not gonna break the bank for anti-doping tests for shows that are going down at York Hall.
It's virtue signaling, if it's anything. The marriage between virtue signaling and opportunism.
Victor's an opportunist.
You need me to tell you that a convicted felon is also an opportunist.
Come on.
Wake up and smell a TRT, sweetheart.
Come on.
Care so much about anti-doping in the sport of boxing, keep the same energy for everyone, not just Eddie. Finally, in men's welterweight news, Crawford says he made the decision to fight Spence as a southpaw in the dressing room ahead of the fight. That was the key to victory.
I figured that's what Crawford was gonna do. He was gonna come out fighting southpaw because Spence ain't used to that.
He's used to orthodox fighters, as most fighters are orthodox fighters. Crawford is considered the most prolific switch-hitting puncher of his era, and the Nebraska native admitted in a recent interview with Joe Rogan that he strategically slugged it out with the lefty Spence as a southpaw en route to a 9th-round stoppage win. "I made the change to fight southpaw in the back dressing room. I was like, how should I come out?" said Crawford.
Came out southpaw like I said he would.
But because Terrence made that decision on a whim, just moments before making his ring walk, that accents what I've been telling you. Terrence has more ways of fighting a fight than Errol does. Stylistically, he already has a style that doesn't favor Errol Spence Jr., but he has more than one way to use it, which just makes him that much harder to beat.
And Errol wants to run it back with him?
I just had that chip on my shoulder to go head on with the bull and just go fight him. I was like, just box. And then I was remembering he hadn't fought too many southpaws before, and then on one of the occasions he got hurt really badly by a hook. I was like, I'm coming out southpaw, and we're gonna box just to start off, but at the same time, I'm going to get my respect out the gate. I'm not going to be doing all of that moving. The plan was never to move. He ain't no Terminator. I was going to be right there in front of him like I always do. I was going to make him miss and make him pay, and I fought my fight. I feel that was the key to the victory, because he wasn't used to fighting southpaws.
The angle of attack is important.
You're a southpaw like Errol Spence Jr. What you're more accustomed to is facing orthodox fighters, not other southpaws like yourself. So when you're fighting a guy who comes out southpaw, he's already got a stylistic advantage over you.
It's not as simple as saying, yeah, because Terrence fought southpaw, that was all it was.
It's that Errol is a volume puncher and Terrence Crawford is a counter puncher. All the openings Terrence needs to get off those counters, they're right there. And it's amplified by him fighting out of the southpaw stance, which Errol isn't used to.
And Errol has slower feet than Terrence Crawford.
Crawford has fought almost exclusively in an orthodox stance in recent fights, and he admitted it depends on the foe, on how he approaches the tactics. I think it's depending on the opponent. If I feel comfortable and better fighting orthodox versus southpaw, I feel that I am equally great in both stances. I'm very powerful from both stances. I hit just as hard with my left, probably even harder with my left than my right.
He's a two-handed puncher.
Errol has slower feet and messier footwork than Terrence Crawford does, because what Errol wants to do is pin down his opponent, plant those feet, and let him go. A guy who's constantly moving,
He doesn't get to set his feet.
Crawford sets him up by keeping him moving,
Just slight movements.
getting him to open up, getting him to shoot that jab so he can counter it.
He's faster than Errol.
I look at it like you can't go nowhere. You're trapped. You move to your left, I can cut you off and go southpaw. You go to your right, I can cut you off and go orthodox. In the end, it's great that I can pack a punch in both hands as well. A lot of people, when they switch, give up something. When I switch, I gain something in both stances that I probably don't have in the other stance. It's great for me.
Not so great for Errol.
Talk about the angle of attack and the style of the fighters, but even mid-range to inside, where Errol Spence Jr. normally excels. Normally, that's Errol's sweet spot, fighting in the pocket. He was out-muscled in the pocket by Terrence Crawford.
What happened there?
Well, Errol throws a lot of photo finish punches that are easy for the casuals to appreciate.
How he commits to the body.
Commits to the punches. He really drives those shots, but what they don't notice is Errol's punches are a lot wider. Even in the pocket, they're a lot wider than Terrence's punches. Those short hooks, those short uppercuts, mid-range to inside.
Terrence's punches in the pocket are shorter than Errol's. They're tighter.
Errol's punches are wider, thus easier to counter.
And none of this is saying that Errol is a bad fighter, that he's a bad fighter. It's just that he's too simple for Terrence.
He's too textbook. He's too easy to read. I don't know what, if anything, he can change ahead of a rematch, ahead of a second fight, but because he's exercised his rematch clause,
He's the one that's got to figure it out.
no, I don't like his chances. How many times have you heard me say that?
That's why I think he's cashing out.
The last stand of Errol Spence Jr.